"You embarrass me. I'm disgusted by you." Those were the words my daughter-in-law Jasmine spat at me across the table at Romano's, the fancy Italian restaurant where we were celebrating my grandson Caleb's high school graduation. Not quietly, not discreetly, but loud enough for every family in that crowded dining room to hear. She stood up, her designer dress shimmering under the restaurant lights, pointing her perfectly manicured finger at me like I was some kind of criminal. "I can't stand having you in our family anymore." And as every head in that restaurant turned to stare at the mortified old woman being publicly humiliated by her son's wife, I sat there, calmly cutting my chicken parmigiana, and smiled. Because Jasmine had no idea that in 6 months of careful investigation, I had uncovered secrets about her past that would destroy everything she had built, including the daughter she abandoned 15 years ago and told everyone was dead. My name is Bernice Caldwell, and at 72 years old, I thought I'd seen every kind of cruelty that family members could inflict on each other. I was wrong. What happened that night at Caleb's graduation dinner was just the culmination of 3 years of psychological warfare that my daughter-in-law had been waging against me. But it was also the moment I decided to stop being the victim and start being the architect of her downfall. The humiliation at Romano's didn't come out of nowhere. It was the result of a calculated campaign that Jasmine had been orchestrating since the day she married my son Marcus 4 years ago. She had systematically worked to isolate me from my own family, to make me feel unwelcome in my son's home, and to convince everyone that I was a bitter, interfering old woman who needed to be managed rather than respected. But let me start from the beginning, because you need to understand exactly what kind of person Jasmine really is to appreciate how satisfying her destruction became. When Marcus first brought Jasmine home to meet me, I tried so hard to like her. She was beautiful, tall, elegant, with striking features and an expensive wardrobe that suggested she came from money. She spoke with perfect diction, claimed to have graduated from an elite private college, and seemed to adore my son. "Mrs. Caldwell," she said that first day, kissing both my cheeks in that affected way some people think makes them seem sophisticated. "Marcus has told me so much about you. I can't wait for us to be close." She brought me flowers, complimented my cooking, and made all the right noises about how important family was to her. She told touching stories about losing her own parents in a car accident when she was in college, about having no family left in the world except an elderly aunt who lived in Europe. "Marcus is everything to me," she said, dabbing at her eyes with the tissue. "And his family is the family I never had. I hope you'll think of me as the daughter you never had." I was charmed. Who wouldn't be? Here was this beautiful, educated woman who clearly loved my son and wanted to be part of our family. When Marcus told me he was planning to propose, I was genuinely happy for them. The wedding was elaborate and expensive. Jasmine insisted on having it at the country club with over 200 guests, designer flowers, and a reception that cost more than most people spend on a car. She claimed her late parents had left her a substantial inheritance that she wanted to use to give Marcus the wedding of his dreams. I helped with the planning, of course. I addressed invitations, coordinated with vendors, and even contributed some of my own savings when costs started spiraling beyond what they had budgeted. Jasmine was so grateful, so sweet about accepting my help. "Bernice," she said, hugging me after a particularly stressful day of wedding planning, "I'm so lucky to have you. You're the mother I always dreamed of having." The red flags started appearing almost immediately after the honeymoon. The first sign something was wrong came when Jasmine began making subtle comments about my appearance and behavior at family gatherings. Nothing obviously cruel, just little observations that made me feel self-conscious. "Oh, Bernice, did you mean to wear that dress to church today? It's interesting," she'd say, with a sweet smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Marcus, maybe we should suggest your mother see a doctor about her memory. She's told that same story about your father 3 times tonight. I think it's so sweet how your mother tries to keep up with current events, even when she doesn't quite understand what's happening in the world. Each comment was delivered with concern, with love, with the perfect tone of a devoted daughter-in-law who was just worried about her elderly mother-in-law's well-being. But the cumulative effect was to make everyone around us start looking at me differently, start seeing me as confused, outdated, embarrassing. Marcus, bless his heart, was completely oblivious. He was so in love, so grateful to have found someone who seemed to adore him that he couldn't see what was happening. When I tried to talk to him about Jasmine's behavior, he dismissed my concerns. Mom, Jasmine loves you. She's always telling me how wonderful you are. Maybe you're just being a little sensitive. But Marcus, the way she talks to me sometimes, Mom, you're not used to having another woman in the family. It's an adjustment for everyone. Jasmine is just trying to help, and maybe it comes across wrong sometimes. The second phase of Jasmine's campaign was more direct. She began excluding me from family events and decisions, always with a reasonable explanation. Oh, Bernice, I didn't invite you to Marcus's birthday dinner because I thought it would be too late for you. You know how you get tired in the evenings. We decided not to tell you about Caleb's soccer tournament because we didn't want you to feel obligated to come. The weather was supposed to be terrible, and we were worried about you driving in the rain. Each exclusion was wrapped in concern for my age, my health, my comfort. But the message was clear. I was becoming a burden, an obligation, someone who needed to be managed rather than included. Caleb, my grandson, Marcus's son from his first marriage, was caught in the middle. He was only 14 when Marcus and Jasmine got married, and he clearly didn't understand what was happening. I could see the confusion in his eyes when Jasmine would make her comments about me, when family gatherings became tense and awkward. "Grandma Bernice," he asked me one day when we were alone, "why doesn't Jasmine like you?" "What makes you think she doesn't like me, sweetheart?" "I don't know. She's always saying things that sound nice but feel mean. And Dad gets weird when you're both around." Caleb, sometimes adults have complicated relationships, but you don't need to worry about that. What matters is that I love you and your dad, and that never changes. But I could see that the tension was affecting Caleb too. He started becoming quieter around me, more hesitant to share things about his life. Jasmine had begun positioning herself as his primary maternal figure, and she was subtly discouraging his relationship with me. "Caleb, maybe you shouldn't bother Grandma Bernice with all your school stories. She's from a different generation and might not understand." "I think Grandma Bernice is getting a little forgetful, Caleb. We should probably not rely on her for important things like picking you up from school." "Caleb, I know you love your grandmother, but she's getting older and set in her ways. Sometimes it's easier to just keep family matters between us." The third phase was the most insidious. Jasmine began rewriting family history and traditions, always positioning herself as the reasonable one and me as the difficult one. When I brought my famous apple pie to Thanksgiving dinner, a tradition I'd maintained for 20 years, Jasmine announced that she'd also made an apple pie because she wasn't sure if Bernice would remember to bring one this year. When I suggested we continue the family tradition of opening Christmas presents on Christmas morning, Jasmine explained to everyone that she thought Christmas Eve would be more convenient for everyone's schedule and that traditions should evolve with the family. When I offered to host Easter dinner, as I had for decades, Jasmine insisted that her house was more suitable for entertaining and that I shouldn't stress myself with all that cooking at my age. Every tradition that had defined our family for decades was slowly being transferred to Jasmine, and I was being positioned as the old woman who couldn't let go, who was stuck in the past, who was making things difficult for everyone. Marcus went along with all of it, not because he was malicious, but because Jasmine was so skilled at making her power grabs seem reasonable and my objections seem petty. Mom, Jasmine's house is bigger. It makes sense to have dinner there. Mom, maybe it is time to try some new traditions. Change can be good. Mom, Jasmine is just trying to help. Why are you making this so difficult? The worst part was watching Caleb gradually distance himself from me. Not because he loved me less, but because Jasmine had created an environment where showing affection for me felt disloyal to her. Caleb, are you calling Grandma Bernice again? You just talked to her yesterday. Don't you think you're bothering her too much? Caleb, I noticed you've been asking Grandma Bernice for advice about school. You know I'm here if you need help with anything, right? Caleb, maybe we should plan some special activities just for our immediate family. Sometimes it's nice to have bonding time without the extended family. By Caleb's junior year of high school, I had gone from being a central figure in my grandson's life to a peripheral one. I saw him at major holidays and special occasions, but the easy, close relationship we'd always had was strained and artificial. And through it all, Jasmine maintained her perfect facade. At church, at community events, with Marcus's friends and colleagues, she was the devoted daughter-in-law who loved her husband's family so much. She would link her arm through mine at social gatherings, introduce me as my wonderful mother-in-law Bernice, and speak about how blessed she felt to be part of our family. But in private, her mask would slip. The comments became sharper, more pointed, more designed to wound. Bernice, that perfume is a little overwhelming. Maybe something more age-appropriate next time. Bernice, Caleb mentioned you gave him some advice about college applications. I think it's sweet that you want to help, but the process has changed so much since your day. Maybe leave the important decisions to people who understand the current system. Bernice, Marcus and I were talking, and we think it might be time for you to consider moving into one of those nice senior communities. The house is getting too big for you, and we worry about you being alone. That last comment was particularly rich, considering that my house was paid off, perfectly maintained, and filled with 40 years of memories. But Jasmine had begun a subtle campaign to convince Marcus that I was becoming unable to live independently. I drove by your mother's house yesterday, Marcus, and I noticed the lawn hasn't been mown. I'm worried she's not keeping up with the maintenance. Your mother seemed confused when I called her last week. She asked me the same question twice. Maybe we should talk to her doctor about her memory. I think your mother is getting lonely, Marcus. She's been calling more often lately, and some of the things she says don't quite make sense. None of it was true, of course. My house was immaculate, my mind was sharp, and I wasn't calling any more often than I ever had. But Jasmine was planting seeds of doubt, creating a narrative that I was declining, becoming a problem that needed to be solved. The breaking point should have come 2 years ago when I discovered something that changed everything I thought I knew about Jasmine. I had been at Marcus's house, babysitting Caleb while they went to a work function. Caleb was doing homework, and I was tidying up the kitchen when I noticed a stack of mail on the counter. Most of it was the usual bills and advertisements, but one envelope caught my attention. It was addressed to Jasmine Morrison at Marcus's address. Not Jasmine Caldwell, her married name, but Morrison. The return address was from a law firm in Nevada. Now, I'm not generally a nosy person, but something about that envelope bothered me. Jasmine had told us her maiden name was Pemberton, that she'd grown up in Connecticut, that her parents were both dead. So who was Jasmine Morrison, and why was she receiving legal mail under that name? I didn't open the envelope, of course, but I did make note of the law firm's name and address. And later that week, I did something I never thought I would do. I hired a private investigator. The investigator I chose was a woman named Sandra Mills, who specialized in background checks and had excellent reviews online. I told her I wanted to verify some information about my daughter-in-law, that I had concerns about inconsistencies in her background. "Mrs. Caldwell," Sandra said during our first meeting, "I have to ask, what exactly are you hoping to find? And what will you do with the information if I find something concerning?" "I'm hoping to find that my suspicions are wrong and that Jasmine is exactly who she says she is," I told her honestly. "But if she's not, then my son and grandson deserve to know the truth." "All right, I'll need some basic information to get started. Full name, approximate age, any addresses you know about, places of employment, that sort of thing." I gave Sandra everything I knew about Jasmine, including the mystery envelope addressed to Jasmine Morrison. Sandra said she'd start with public records and see what she could find. 2 weeks later, Sandra called me with news that made my blood run cold. "Mrs. Caldwell, I need you to sit down. What I found about your daughter-in-law is significant." "Tell me." "First, there's no record of anyone named Jasmine Pemberton who matches her age and description growing up in Connecticut. No birth certificate, no school records, no family members. So Pemberton isn't her real name." "No. Her real name is Jasmine Morrison, and she's from Las Vegas, Nevada. She's 34 years old, not 31 like she told your family. And, Mrs. Caldwell, she's not a widow who lost her parents in a car accident." "What do you mean?" "Her parents are both alive and living in Las Vegas. And, Mrs. Caldwell, she has a 15-year-old daughter named Chloe who lives with her maternal grandmother." I felt like the world had tilted off its axis. "A daughter?" "Yes, Chloe Morrison. According to the records I found, Jasmine abandoned her when she was an infant and hasn't had contact with her since. The child was raised by Jasmine's mother, Linda Morrison. And here's the really disturbing part. Jasmine told her daughter that her mother was dead." "She told her own child she was dead?" "Yes. When Chloe was old enough to ask questions about her mother, the family apparently decided it would be easier to tell her that Jasmine had died rather than explain that she'd abandoned her. Chloe has been raised believing her mother died in an accident when she was a baby." I couldn't speak for several minutes. The woman who had been in my family for 4 years, who had been positioning herself as someone who valued family above everything, who had criticized me for not understanding modern family dynamics, had abandoned her own child and faked her death to avoid responsibility. "There's more," Sandra continued. "Jasmine's education background is also fabricated. She didn't graduate from the elite college she claims. She actually dropped out of community college in Las Vegas after 1 semester. And the inheritance she supposedly used to pay for her wedding, that came from a settlement she received after claiming workplace harassment at a casino where she used to work. So everything she told us was a lie?" Pretty much everything, yes. Mrs. Caldwell, this woman has completely reinvented herself. She moved to your city 5 years ago, created a new identity, and has been living a lie ever since. Why would someone do that? From what I can piece together, she was involved in some questionable activities in Las Vegas. Nothing criminal that I can find, but she had a reputation for being unreliable, for using people, for creating drama wherever she went. It looks like she decided to start fresh somewhere else. And my son has no idea. Based on what you've told me about their relationship, I'd say no. She's been very careful to construct a believable background, and most people don't think to verify their spouse's entire life history. That night, I sat in my living room, staring at Sandra's report, trying to process what I'd learned. The woman who had been systematically undermining me for years, who had been working to isolate me from my own family, who had publicly humiliated me at my grandson's graduation dinner, was a complete fraud. She wasn't the orphaned only child she pretended to be. She wasn't the educated professional she claimed to be. She wasn't even the age she said she was. And most shockingly, she wasn't the family-oriented woman who valued relationships above everything. She was someone who had abandoned her own child and lied about it for 15 years. But knowing the truth and knowing what to do with it were two different things. I couldn't just march into Marcus's house and dump this information on him. He was completely besotted by Jasmine, and he would likely assume I was making it up out of jealousy or spite. After years of Jasmine positioning me as the difficult, interfering mother-in-law, he might not believe me even with documentation. I needed to be strategic. I needed to wait for the right moment, when the impact would be maximum and the truth would be undeniable. That moment came 6 months later, at Caleb's graduation dinner. Caleb had just graduated from high school with honors, and Marcus had made reservations at Romano's to celebrate. It was supposed to be a family dinner: Marcus, Jasmine, Caleb, and me. Caleb had specifically asked for me to be included, which I knew bothered Jasmine, but she couldn't object without seeming petty. The dinner started pleasantly enough. Caleb was excited about starting college in the fall. Marcus was proud and beaming, and even Jasmine seemed to be in a good mood. We ordered wine, shared appetizers, and listened to Caleb talk about his plans for his freshman year. But as the evening progressed, I could see Jasmine becoming more and more irritated with me. Maybe it was the wine. Maybe it was the fact that Caleb was directing most of his conversation toward me. Or maybe it was just that she couldn't stand having to share attention with me at what she considered her family celebration. The breaking point came when Caleb mentioned that he'd been asking me for advice about his college major. "Grandma Bernice thinks I should consider pre-law," Caleb said, smiling at me. "She says I've always been good at arguing and that I might make a good lawyer someday." I laughed. "I said you were good at logical thinking and standing up for what you believe in. Those are important qualities for lawyers." Marcus nodded approvingly. "That's actually not bad advice, Mom. Caleb has always been interested in justice and fairness." But Jasmine's face had darkened. "Caleb, you know you should be making these decisions based on current information about career prospects, not outdated ideas about what lawyers do." "I don't think my ideas about lawyers are outdated, Jasmine," I said mildly. "I've been reading about changes in the legal profession, and there are still many opportunities for young people who are passionate about justice." "Reading where? In your magazines from the 1980s? The comment was sharp enough that Caleb looked uncomfortable, and Marcus frowned at his wife. "Jasmine, that's not necessary." I'm just saying that Caleb needs guidance from people who understand the current job market, not people who are stuck in the past. I felt the familiar sting of her casual cruelty, but I kept my voice calm. I think Caleb is smart enough to gather information from multiple sources and make his own decisions. Are you implying that I'm not giving him good guidance? I'm not implying anything, Jasmine. I'm just saying that Caleb benefits from having multiple perspectives. Multiple perspectives from relevant sources, sure. But Caleb doesn't need to be confused by advice from people who don't understand how the world works anymore. Marcus intervened. Jasmine, please. We're supposed to be celebrating Caleb. But Jasmine was just getting started. The wine had loosened her tongue, and years of carefully controlled resentment were starting to spill out. No, Marcus, this needs to be said. I've been patient for years, but I can't pretend anymore. Your mother undermines me constantly. She questions my judgment, she interferes with my relationship with Caleb, and she makes everything about herself. Jasmine, that's not true, Caleb said quietly. It is true, Caleb. You're just too young to see it. But I see how she manipulates conversations, how she tries to make everyone feel sorry for her, how she acts like she's the victim when people don't cater to her every whim. The restaurant was getting quieter around us as other diners began to notice the rising tension at our table. I could feel people starting to stare, but Jasmine was beyond caring about public spectacle. You know what the problem is? She continued, her voice getting louder. Your mother can't accept that you're a grown man with a wife. She can't accept that I'm Caleb's mother figure now. She's jealous and bitter, and she takes it out on everyone around her. Jasmine, stop, Marcus said firmly. You're making a scene. I don't care. I'm tired of pretending that everything's fine when it's not. I'm tired of walking on eggshells around her feelings. I'm tired of her passive-aggressive comments and her fake concern for Caleb. Jasmine, I said quietly, I think you've had too much wine. Maybe we should... Don't you dare patronize me, she snapped, standing up so abruptly that her chair scraped loudly against the floor. I am so sick of your condescending attitude. You think you're better than me, don't you? You think I'm not good enough for your precious son? The entire restaurant was staring now. Caleb looked mortified, Marcus looked furious, and I felt my cheeks burning with embarrassment. But I also felt something else. Opportunity. You embarrass me, she shouted, pointing her finger at me across the table. I'm disgusted by you. I can't stand having you in our family anymore. The words hung in the air like a poison cloud. Every person in that restaurant had heard my daughter-in-law publicly humiliate me, had watched her tear me down with vicious, cruel words that no human being should ever say to another. But as I sat there, feeling the weight of every stare, hearing the whispered comments from other tables, I thought about the folder of documents sitting in my purse. I thought about Chloe Morrison, the 15-year-old girl in Las Vegas who believed her mother was dead. I thought about all the lies, all the manipulation, all the careful construction of a false identity that Jasmine had built her new life on. And I smiled. Jasmine, I said calmly, cutting a piece of my chicken parmigiana as if nothing had happened. It's very interesting coming from someone who told her own daughter she was dead. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. All the color drained from Jasmine's face. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Her hand, which had been pointing accusingly at me, began to tremble. What did you say? She whispered. I said, it's interesting that you find me embarrassing, considering that you abandoned your 15-year-old daughter, Chloe, and told her you were dead so you wouldn't have to take responsibility for her. Marcus stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. Mom, what are you talking about? I reached into my purse and pulled out a manila folder.
I'm talking about the fact that your wife isn't who she claims to be, Marcus. Her real name is Jasmine Morrison, not Jasmine Pemberton. She's from Las Vegas, not Connecticut. Her parents aren't dead. They're alive and well and raising the daughter she abandoned when she was a baby. That's not, Jasmine stammered, but she couldn't form a complete sentence. I opened the folder and spread some documents on the table. Birth certificates, school records, court documents related to child custody, all with Jasmine's real name, all telling the true story of who she really was.
She didn't inherit money from dead parents to pay for your wedding, Marcus. She got a settlement from suing her former employer for harassment. She didn't graduate from an elite college. She dropped out of community college after one semester. And she didn't lose her family in a tragic accident. She walked away from them to start a new life where no one knew the truth about her. Caleb was staring at the documents spread across the table. These are real? They're real, sweetheart. I hired a private investigator to verify some concerns I had about inconsistencies in Jasmine's background. What she found was that everything Jasmine told us about herself was a lie. Jasmine suddenly found her voice. You had me investigated? You violated my privacy. I verified information that you voluntarily shared with our family, and I discovered that none of it was true. Marcus was reading through the documents, his face growing paler with each page. Jasmine, is this real? Do you have a daughter? Marcus, I can explain. Do you have a daughter? He repeated, his voice deadly quiet. Jasmine looked around the restaurant as if searching for an escape route. Every table was watching our drama unfold. Every face was focused on her answer. Yes, she whispered finally, but it's not what you think. You have a 15-year-old daughter who thinks you're dead? How is that not what we think? She's better off without me, Jasmine said, her voice rising again. I was young. I made mistakes. I wasn't ready to be a mother. So you told her you were dead? Marcus asked, his voice filled with disgust. It was easier than explaining. Easier for who? For you or for her? Jasmine started crying, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of someone who had been caught and was trying to generate sympathy. Marcus, please, let me explain. I love you. I love Caleb. I was trying to protect our family. By lying about everything? Caleb stood up from the table, his napkin falling to the floor. You've been lying to us for 40 years about who you are, where you come from, everything about your life, and you have a daughter who thinks her mother is dead? Caleb, please. No. Caleb's voice cracked with emotion. You've been telling me for years that family is the most important thing, that people who abandon their families are selfish and wrong. You made me feel guilty for wanting to spend time with Grandma Bernice because you said I was neglecting our immediate family. But you abandoned your own daughter. The truth of Caleb's words hit Jasmine like a physical blow. All her careful positioning, all her manipulation about family values and loyalty, all her criticism of me for not understanding modern families, all of it was revealed as projection from someone who had committed the ultimate family betrayal. Marcus was still reading through the documents, and his expression was changing from shock to disgust to rage. Jasmine, how old are you really? Does it matter? How old are you? 34. So you lied about your age too. What else? What else about you is fake? Jasmine looked around the restaurant wildly, realizing that her perfect life was crumbling in real time, in front of dozens of witnesses, with no way to control the narrative or manipulate the situation. Everything I told you about loving you was real, she said desperately. Everything about wanting to be part of your family was real. Except you already had a family, and you walked away from it. You had a daughter who needed you, and you chose to disappear rather than be responsible for her. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. I understand that you're someone who runs away when things get difficult. I understand that you're willing to lie about anything to get what you want. And I understand that you've spent 4 years trying to isolate my son and grandson from me because you were afraid I might discover the truth about who you really are. You vindictive old bitch. You planned this. You waited until tonight to destroy me in front of everyone. I waited until you publicly humiliated me to show my family who you really are. You called me embarrassing and disgusting in front of a restaurant full of people, so I thought it was appropriate to respond with the truth about which one of us should actually be embarrassed. Marcus stood up, his hands shaking as he gathered the documents. We're leaving. Jasmine, don't come home tonight. Go to a hotel or wherever you want, but I need time to process this without you there. Jasmine, please. 4 years, he said, his voice breaking. 4 years of marriage built on lies. 4 years of you making me doubt my own mother while you were hiding the fact that you abandoned your own child. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that, Caleb said. You made me feel bad for loving Grandma Bernice while you were lying about everything. You told me that people who don't prioritize family are selfish and wrong, but you told your own daughter you were dead? Jasmine made one last desperate attempt at manipulation. Caleb, please, I love you like my own son. But you abandoned your actual daughter. So what does your love really mean? The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Jasmine looked at Marcus, at Caleb, at me, and realized that there was nothing left to say. Her carefully constructed life had been demolished in the space of 20 minutes, and everyone in that restaurant had witnessed her complete destruction. She grabbed her purse and ran for the exit, leaving behind the family she had tried so hard to steal from me. The restaurant slowly returned to normal conversation levels, but I could feel the lingering stares and whispered discussions about what everyone had just witnessed. Marcus sat back down heavily, looking like he'd aged 10 years in the past half hour. Mom, he said quietly, I owe you an apology, a huge apology. Marcus,
No. Let me say this. I let her convince me that you were the problem. I let her make me doubt your concerns about her behavior. I chose her word over yours, and I was wrong. Caleb reached across the table and took my hand. Grandma Bernice, I'm so sorry. I let her make me feel like spending time with you was wrong somehow. I let her convince me that you were old-fashioned and didn't understand our family. Caleb, you were just a child when she started her manipulation. You couldn't have known what she was doing. But I should have trusted my instincts about you. I always felt guilty when I was around both of you, like I had to choose sides. Now I understand why. Marcus was still staring at the documents. She has a daughter who thinks she's dead. How do you even begin to explain that level of cruelty? You don't, I said simply. You just accept that you married someone capable of that level of cruelty and decide what you want to do about it. Over the next few weeks, the full scope of Jasmine's deception became clear. The investigation I had started revealed even more lies than I had originally discovered. She had forged documents to support her false identity. She had stolen money from her former employers in Las Vegas. She had a pattern of using people for financial support and then disappearing when they became inconvenient. Most importantly, she had been having an affair for the past 6 months with a man she met at her gym. The affair had been going on even while she was publicly humiliating me for supposedly interfering with her family. Marcus filed for divorce immediately. The process was ugly, with Jasmine alternating between begging for forgiveness and threatening to destroy him financially. But her credibility was completely shot, and she had no legal standing to demand anything significant. The most difficult part was deciding what to do about Chloe, Jasmine's daughter in Las Vegas.
I keep thinking about that girl, Marcus said one evening when he was at my house for dinner. She's 15 years old and she's been living a lie her entire life. Her mother is alive, but she doesn't know it. What do you want to do? I asked. I think she deserves to know the truth. Not about all the details of what Jasmine did to us, but at least that her mother is alive. That's a very generous impulse, Marcus, but it's also complicated. That girl has built her life around believing her mother is dead. Learning the truth might be more harmful than helpful. Caleb, who had been quietly listening to our conversation, spoke up. What if we contacted her grandmother, the one who's been raising her? She would know best what Chloe needs to know and when. It was a wise suggestion from an 18-year-old who had just learned some hard lessons about family deception. Marcus did eventually contact Linda Morrison, Chloe's grandmother, through the private investigator. The conversation was difficult, but necessary. Linda confirmed everything we had learned about Jasmine's abandonment and the decision to tell Chloe her mother was dead. We thought it would be easier for her to grieve a dead mother than to wonder why her living mother didn't want her. Maybe that was wrong, but we were trying to protect her from feeling rejected and abandoned. Marcus told Linda everything about Jasmine's false identity, her marriage to him, and the way her lies had finally been exposed. Linda was shocked, but not entirely surprised. That sounds like the Jasmine I knew. Always looking for an easier way. Always willing to hurt people to get what she wanted. I'm sorry she deceived your family the way she deceived her own daughter. Together, Marcus and Linda decided that Chloe should be told the truth about her mother, but gradually and with professional counseling support. It was determined that Chloe was old enough and mature enough to handle knowing that her mother was alive, but that she would need help processing the complex emotions that would come with that knowledge. The revelation to Chloe happened 6 months after Jasmine's exposure. Linda arranged for family counseling sessions to help Chloe understand that her mother's abandonment was about Jasmine's character flaws, not about Chloe being unworthy of love. Marcus asked if he could write Chloe a letter, explaining that he and Caleb had also been deceived by Jasmine and that they understood what it felt like to discover that someone you trusted had been lying to you. He wanted her to know that she wasn't alone in feeling betrayed and confused. Chloe's response, forwarded through Linda, was mature beyond her years. Thank you for telling me the truth, even though it was hard to hear. I'm sorry my mother lied to you too. I'm glad Caleb has a good father and grandmother who care about him. Meanwhile, Jasmine's life continued to unravel in spectacular fashion. Word of her deception had spread through our community quickly, and she found herself completely ostracized. The gym where she'd been having her affair asked her to find a new facility. The country club where she'd been a member revoked her membership. Even her hair salon and favorite restaurants made it clear she was no longer welcome. She tried to salvage her reputation by telling people that I had set her up and that the investigation was motivated by jealousy and spite. But the documented evidence of her lies was too extensive and too damning for anyone to believe her version of events. She also tried to contest the divorce settlement, claiming that Marcus owed her compensation for the emotional distress of having her privacy violated. Her lawyer quickly dropped her as a client when it became clear that her case was not only frivolous, but potentially criminal, given the identity fraud she had committed. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Jasmine left town entirely. I heard through various sources that she had moved to Florida, probably to start over with yet another new identity and new set of lies. Do you think she'll try this again? Caleb asked me one day. Find some other family to deceive? Probably, I said honestly. People like Jasmine don't usually change their fundamental character. They just get better at hiding it or find new victims who are easier to manipulate. That's depressing.
It is, but it's also why it's important to pay attention to red flags and trust your instincts about people, even when they're telling you what you want to hear. Caleb had learned that lesson the hard way, but he had learned it well. He was now much more skeptical of people who seemed too good to be true, much more aware of the difference between genuine kindness and manipulative charm. The aftermath of Jasmine's exposure also strengthened my relationship with Marcus in ways I hadn't expected. He was devastated by the betrayal, humiliated by how completely he'd been fooled, and racked with guilt about how he treated me during the years of Jasmine's manipulation. "Mom, I keep thinking about all the times I took her side against you," he said during one of our mini conversations about what had happened. "All the times I told you that you were being too sensitive or that you needed to give her a chance." Marcus, she was very skilled at what she did. She made her manipulation seem like concern, made her cruelty seem like helpful advice. You're not the first person to be fooled by someone like that. But you weren't fooled. You saw through her from the beginning. "Not from the beginning," I corrected. "I wanted to like her at first. I wanted to believe that you'd found someone wonderful who would make you happy. It took time for me to see the pattern of her behavior." "When did you know for sure?" "When she started trying to convince you that I was becoming incompetent and needed to be managed like a child. That's when I realized she wasn't just thoughtless or insensitive. She was deliberately trying to isolate me from my own family." "And that's when you hired the investigator?" "That's when I started paying closer attention to the inconsistencies in her stories. The investigator came later when I found that envelope addressed to Jasmine Morrison." Marcus shook his head. 4 years of my life. 4 years of believing I was married to someone who didn't exist. "But you learned something important about yourself in the process," I pointed out. "You learned that you're someone who wants to believe the best about people, someone who values family and loyalty. Those are good qualities, even if they made you vulnerable to someone who exploited them." "I also learned that I need to listen to my mother more carefully," he said with a rueful smile. "Your instincts about people are much better than mine." The relationship between Caleb and me was also transformed by the experience. The guilt and confusion that Jasmine had created between us was completely gone, replaced with a deeper understanding and appreciation for each other. "Grandma Bernice," he said to me one evening when he was helping me with some yard work, "I want you to know that I never actually believed the things Jasmine said about you, but I felt like I had to choose between making her happy and making you happy, and that felt impossible." "Caleb, you were in an impossible situation. Jasmine created that dynamic deliberately to make you feel guilty no matter what you chose. I know that now, but I want you to know that even when I was acting distant or awkward around you, I never stopped loving you or thinking you were amazing. I knew that, sweetheart. I could see that you were struggling with something, but I could also see that your heart was still the same. I'm never going to let anyone make me feel guilty for loving my family again," he said firmly. "And I'm going to be much more careful about people who try to create drama or make me choose sides." Caleb went off to college that fall with a much more mature understanding of family dynamics and personal relationships. He called me regularly, visited when he could, and never again allowed anyone to make him feel guilty for maintaining a close relationship with his grandmother. The whole experience also changed how I thought about family loyalty and the dynamics in in-law relationships.
I realized that I had been too passive in the face of Jasmine's manipulation, too willing to keep the peace rather than confront her behavior directly. I should have called her out earlier, I told my friend Margaret Chen during one of our coffee dates. I should have been more direct about what she was doing instead of hoping Marcus would see it on his own. Bernice, you handled it perfectly, Margaret disagreed. If you had confronted her directly without proof, she would have used that to convince Marcus that you were the one creating drama. By waiting until you had documented evidence of her lies, you made sure that the truth couldn't be disputed or dismissed. But think of how much heartache could have been avoided if I'd acted sooner. Or think of how much worse it could have been if she had had more time to solidify her position in the family. What if Marcus had gotten her pregnant? What if they'd bought a house together? What if she had convinced him to cut off contact with you entirely? Margaret was right. By the time I exposed Jasmine, she had been working toward getting Marcus to convince me to move into assisted living. She'd been positioning herself to inherit my house and savings when I died. She had been systematically isolating me from my family so that when she finally pushed me out entirely, Marcus would accept it as necessary and reasonable. If I had waited much longer, or if I hadn't discovered her real identity when I did, she might have succeeded in destroying my relationship with my family permanently. 2 years after Jasmine's exposure, Marcus started dating again. He was much more cautious this time, much more aware of red flags and manipulation tactics. When he introduced me to Sarah, the woman he'd been seeing for 6 months, it was clear that he had learned from his mistakes. Sarah was genuine, warm, and made no attempt to position herself as a replacement for anyone in our family. She was interested in getting to know Caleb and me as individuals, not as obstacles to be managed or eliminated. She had her own career, her own friends, her own life that she wasn't trying to escape from or reinvent.
Most importantly, she was completely honest about her background, her past relationships, and her goals for the future. When Marcus told her about what had happened with Jasmine, she was horrified by the level of deception and manipulation. "I can't imagine lying about having a child," she said when Marcus told her the whole story. "How do you even live with yourself after abandoning your own daughter and telling her you're dead?" Some people are capable of compartmentalizing their guilt in ways that other people can't understand, I told her. Jasmine convinced herself that she was protecting her daughter by disappearing, when really she was protecting herself from responsibility. It's just so cruel. That poor girl, growing up thinking her mother was dead when she was really just not interested in being a parent. Sarah's genuine horror at Jasmine's behavior was refreshing after years of dealing with someone who could rationalize any level of cruelty as long as it served her purposes. When Marcus and Sarah got engaged, 18 months after they started dating, the engagement was everything the one with Jasmine hadn't been. It was honest, straightforward, and based on genuine compatibility rather than fantasy and deception. Sarah asked me to help plan the wedding, not because she was trying to manipulate me into liking her, but because she genuinely wanted my input and valued my experience. The wedding was smaller and more intimate than Marcus's first wedding, but it was also more meaningful because it was built on truth rather than lies. Caleb, now in his junior year of college, was the best man. In his speech at the reception, he talked about how happy he was that his father had found someone who valued honesty and family loyalty. He also thanked me for never giving up on our family, even when it would have been easier to just walk away. My grandmother taught me that real love means showing up for people even when it's difficult, he said. She showed up for my dad and me when we needed her most, and she never stopped fighting for our family even when we didn't deserve it. It was a beautiful tribute, and it made me realize
how much good had ultimately come from such a painful experience. Caleb had learned crucial lessons about character and integrity. Marcus had learned to trust his instincts and value honesty over charm. And I had learned that sometimes fighting for your family means exposing the people who are trying to destroy it. 3 years after Jasmine's exposure, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Chloe Morrison, now 18 and about to start college. Dear Mrs. Caldwell, I hope it's okay that I'm writing to you. Your son Marcus gave my grandmother your address and said you might not mind hearing from me. I wanted to thank you for exposing my mother's lies. I know that wasn't your intention. You were trying to protect your own family, but it ended up helping me too. Finding out that my mother was alive was devastating at first, but it was also a relief to finally know the truth. I've been in therapy for the past 2 years, working through my feelings about being abandoned and lied to. My therapist says that learning the truth, even painful truth, is usually healthier than living with comforting lies. I also wanted you to know that I don't blame Marcus or Caleb for what my mother did to them. From what my grandmother told me, it sounds like they were victims of her deception just like I was. I'm starting college in the fall, pre-law actually. Caleb's plan inspired me. And I'm excited about building a life based on honesty and integrity. I hope someday I can be the kind of person who stands up for truth the way you did, even when it's difficult. Thank you for caring enough about your family to fight for them. Caleb is lucky to have a grandmother like you. Sincerely, Chloe Morrison. Reading that letter, I felt a sense of completion that I hadn't expected. Jasmine's lies had damaged so many people. Her daughter, my family, probably others we never even knew about. But by exposing the truth, we had been able to help heal some of that damage.
Chloe was free to build her life on honesty, instead of living with the confusion and pain of not knowing why her mother had died. Caleb and Marcus were free from a manipulative presence that was slowly poisoning their relationships with each other and with me. And I was free to enjoy my family without constantly defending myself against someone who was trying to isolate and eliminate me. 4 years later, as I'm writing this story, Jasmine remains a cautionary tale in our community. Her behavior is still discussed as an example of how dangerous it can be to ignore red flags about someone's character. How important it is to verify important information about people we invite into our lives. I occasionally wonder what happened to her after she left town. Did she find another family to deceive? Did she eventually face consequences for her pattern of manipulation and fraud? Did she ever feel genuine remorse for the daughter she abandoned or the family she destroyed? But mostly, I don't think about her at all anymore. She was a destructive force that entered our lives temporarily, caused significant damage, and was eventually expelled when her true nature was revealed. Like a severe storm that destroys property but ultimately passes, leading people to rebuild stronger and more prepared for future challenges. Marcus and Sarah have been happily married for 2 years now. They bought a house with a guest room that's always available for me, and they include me in their decisions and celebrations as a valued family member, not as an obligation to be managed. Caleb graduated from college last year and is now in his first year of law school. He calls me every week, visits whenever he can, and still asks me for advice about important decisions. He's dating a lovely young woman named Emma who reminds me of Sarah, honest, straightforward, and genuinely interested in being part of our family rather than trying to reshape it to suit her needs. And me? At 76 years old, I'm healthier and happier than I've been in years. I volunteer at a local organization that helps seniors avoid financial scams and family exploitation. I speak at community groups about the warning signs of manipulative behavior and the importance of trusting your instincts about people who seem too good to be true. I also maintain a relationship with Chloe Morrison, who sends me updates about her college progress and her plans for law school. She's become a remarkable young woman despite the terrible start her mother gave her, and she's proof that people can overcome even the most damaging childhood lies and betrayals. Sometimes people ask me if I regret exposing Jasmine so publicly, if I wish I had handled the situation more privately or diplomatically. The answer is always no. Jasmine chose to humiliate me in front of a restaurant full of people. She chose to attack my character and my place in my own family in the most public and cruel way possible. She gambled that I was a helpless old woman who would simply absorb her abuse and retreat into shame and silence. She was wrong. I was a 72-year-old woman with resources, intelligence, and the determination to protect my family from someone who was systematically trying to destroy our relationships. When she chose to attack me publicly, I chose to defend myself with the truth about who she really was, what she had really done, and what kind of person could abandon her own child and lie about it for 15 years. The truth about someone who could spend 4 years manipulating and isolating an elderly woman while positioning herself as a victim of that woman's interference. The truth about someone who could build an entire identity on lies and then have the audacity to call other people embarrassing and disgusting. Jasmine wanted to humiliate me that night at Romano's. Instead, she humiliated herself by revealing exactly what kind of person she was when she thought she had the power to destroy me without consequences. She learned that some people fight back. And when they do, the truth has a way of destroying lies more completely than any lie ever destroyed the truth. That's what this 76-year-old grandmother did when her daughter-in-law said, "You embarrass me. I'm disgusted by you," at her grandson's graduation dinner. I showed her what real disgust looked like, and I made sure she understood that embarrassment was something she should be feeling, not something she should be inflicting on others. The last I heard, Jasmine was living in Florida under yet another assumed name, probably weaving new lies for new victims. But her daughter Chloe is thriving in law school. My grandson Caleb is building a career based on integrity and justice. And my son Marcus is married to a woman who values truth and family loyalty. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just exposing someone's lies. It's watching everyone they tried to hurt build better, stronger, more honest lives without them. That's a lesson Jasmine Morrison, or whatever name she's using now, will probably never learn. But it's a lesson my family will never forget.